The Ardennes ignites. 3 days earlier, the Ardennes had been quiet. Too quiet. Allied intelligence had insisted that the German army was beaten, exhausted, shattered, incapable of launching any major offensive. But on the morning of December 16th, 1944, that illusion vanished under a rolling wall of fog and fire. At precisely 5:30 hours, the silence broke. German artillery thundered from the mist, pounding American lines from Monschau to Echternach. Within minutes, communications were shredded, outposts isolated, and entire divisions thrown into chaos. The Germans called it Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, Operation Watch on the Rhine. The Allies would come to know it by another name, the Battle of the Bulge. McAllister's crew had been stationed near a narrow Belgian road leading into Bastogne, a place that, within days, would become a legend of defiance. Their vehicle, an M10 Wolverine, was a lean, open-topped tank destroyer, built for speed and stealth rather than heavy armor. Its 3-inch gun could knock out a Panther if it struck first, but against the Tiger's thick frontal plating, it was all but useless. Their unit, the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, was attached to the 3rd Armoured Division, the Spearhead, but now even spearheads were being forced to retreat. The German panzers were moving fast, slipping through gaps in the lines like wolves through snowdrifts. That afternoon, the Wolverine had taken position behind a half-buried hedgerow overlooking a crossroads, a key route for reinforcements heading toward Bastogne. The order came down the radio: hold your ground. Engage only on direct command. It was the kind of cautious directive that made sense in theory, but on the front lines, it meant sitting still while danger crept closer every hour. Inside the M10, the crew went through their routine like clockwork. Lieutenant Brogan, 34, a school teacher before the war, checked his map for the 5th time in an hour. Sergeant Whitaker, the loader, polished each shell casing until it gleamed, muttering that it brought him luck. Driver Tex Carson drummed his fingers on the wheel, eyes flicking toward the fog beyond the periscope. And then there was McAllister, young, restless, and with a marksman's obsession for precision. He'd earned his nickname Red not for his hair, but for the streak of risk that ran through his veins. Where others hesitated, he acted. Where others waited for orders, he trusted instinct. And on this particular day, instinct was whispering that something was coming. As twilight settled, the temperature dropped. The forest turned to glass, every branch coated in ice, every breath crystallized in the air. Then came the sound. Faint, rhythmic, unmistakable. Treads. Contact, McAllister said quietly. Brogan lifted his binoculars. The road beyond the bend was empty for now, but the sound grew louder. He raised his hand for silence. No one spoke. From somewhere deep in the mist, a column of engines began to climb the road. German armor, by the heavy rhythm of the treads. They were coming directly toward the crossroads. Orders, sir? McAllister asked. Brogan hesitated. Hold position. Let them pass through the kill zone. Wait for command. But command wasn't answering. The radios were a mess of static and broken fragments. The 703rd was on its own. As the minutes passed, the noise became overwhelming, a mechanical heartbeat of war echoing through the frozen woods. The men could feel it through the hull, like the pulse of something inevitable. McAllister exhaled slowly, his finger hovering near the trigger. He didn't know it yet, but before the night was over, his decision would not only change the fate of his crew, it would cripple an entire panzer column, and it would all begin with a trail of tracks in the snow. Dawn came slowly, bleeding pale light through the trees. The fog clung to the forest floor like smoke from an invisible fire. McAllister was already awake, his scope trained down the narrow Belgian road that cut through the frost-covered woods. The night silence had been deceptive. The snow told the truth. Fresh tracks, deep, wide, and staggered, marked the path of heavy armor moving west. Not just one tank, a column. Panthers, maybe a tiger among them. He called to Lieutenant Brogan, who climbed from the dugout beside the Wolverine and crouched beside him, binoculars raised. The outlines were faint but distinct. The grooves of treads, the impressions of boots, the signs of German half-tracks escorting armour. Brogan frowned. That's not patrol movement. That's a full column. The men went to their stations. The Wolverine's engine stayed cold. Their orders were to remain silent unless fired upon. The bitter air inside the open-topped turret bit at their faces. They could hear the creak of frozen trees, the distant bark of artillery miles away, and the occasional cough of the engine idling low in the snow. Then came the sound that no one mistook, the rhythmic clatter of Panzer engines. McAllister adjusted the scope again. Through the haze, shapes began to materialize, black silhouettes gliding like ghosts through the fog. Panthers. 2, at least, he murmured. Maybe 3. The lead tank was huge, long-barreled, angular, and menacing even through the mist. Behind it, more followed. Half-tracks, infantry trucks, armoured cars. A full strike group, likely probing for a weak point in the line toward Bastogne. Range? Brogan asked. 400 yards, McAllister replied. They're closing. Brogan tapped his radio. Command, this is Wolverine 2-3. Visual contact with German armour en route Foxtrot, requesting engagement orders. Static, nothing else. He tried again. Still nothing but white noise. McAllister looked up, jaw tight. Sir, if we wait any longer, they'll be on top of us. Orders are clear, Brogan said, quietly. We don't fire until HQ confirms. We can't give away our position. The logic was sound, but to McAllister, it felt suicidal. The German column was perfectly exposed, unaware, lined up like a row of steel dominoes. Every instinct screamed that this was the moment. Sergeant Whitaker, the loader, shifted nervously beside the gun breech. You thinking what I'm thinking, Red? McAllister didn't answer. He just stared through the scope, watching the lead Panther's commander pop his hatch, scanning the tree line with binoculars. D times MN it, Carson muttered from the driver's seat. They'll spot us if the sun hits that ice. Brogan raised his hand. Nobody moves. Nobody breathes. The world seemed to freeze with them. Engines idled. Exhaust plumes rose like ghosts. The Panzers crept forward. The crossroad was less than 300 yards away, now perfect range for a first strike. McAllister's crosshairs hovered over the lead tank's turret ring, the weakest point on a Panther. He knew the Wolverine's 3-inch gun could punch through there if the angle was right. His pulse thudded against the trigger guard. Still, Brogan said nothing. Still, HQ remained silent. Sir, McAllister began. Hold your fire, Brogan cut in. We only get one surprise. We waste it now, we're dead. McAllister's jaw flexed. He didn't argue. But his hand didn't move from the trigger either. He tracked the tank's slow movement through the sight, the cold biting into his fingertips. Outside, the snow began to fall harder. Visibility dropped to barely 50 yards. The German column disappeared into the grey, their engine noise the only sign they were still coming. In the silence that followed, only McAllister's whisper could be heard. They're walking right into it. He could feel it, the timing, the distance, the line of sight. All that remained was a single decision. And soon, that decision would break every rule in the Brate book. The first Panther emerged from the mist like a beast made of iron and smoke. Its turret swung lazily, scanning the tree line, the muzzle of its long 75mm gun slicing through the air like a blade. McAllister's eye pressed against the scope, the reticle perfectly aligned with the turret ring. 280 yards, he whispered. Perfect broadside. Inside the Wolverine, time seemed to slow. Every man was holding his breath. The only sound was the slow tick of cooling metal and the faint hum of the power train underfoot. Then the Panther stopped, right in the middle of the road. It was as if the enemy commander could sense them. The tank idled for a moment, its hatch opening. A figure rose black silhouette against the pale sky, scanning, searching. That was when McAllister made his choice. He'd waited as long as he could. He could almost hear the words echoing in his head. Don't engage. Wait for orders. But orders didn't mean survival anymore. He had, and the shot, and if he let that opportunity pass, the whole column might pour through before they ever got a second chance. Without a word, McAllister squeezed the trigger. The Wolverine roared like thunder. The 3-inch shell screamed downrange, its sonic crack echoing through the valley. It struck the Panther dead center beneath the turret. A blinding flash followed, then a burst of black smoke and orange flame. The blast tore through the fog like a camera flash in a dark room. The turret lifted, twisted, and slammed sideways. Chunks of steel and molten armor rained down into the snow. The German commander vanished in the fireball before he could even shout an order. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then chaos. The rest of the German column lurched to a halt. Engines revved. Treads screeched. Commanders shouted, their voices muffled by the armoured hulls. Infantry scrambled from their half-tracks, ducking into ditches. Inside the Wolverine, Brogan turned to his gunner, eyes wide. "McAllister, what the hell did you just do?" McAllister didn't look away from the sight. "Saved us," he said flatly. "Loader, next round." Whitaker hesitated for half a second, then rammed a new shell into the breach. The metallic clunk echoed inside the turret. Brogan's jaw clenched. He wanted to shout to reassert control, but it was too late. The column was already in motion. Another tank rolled forward, trying to angle its armor toward the direction of the shot. McAllister fired again. The shell hit low, ripping through the Panther's transmission. The vehicle lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from its rear vents. "Two down," McAllister muttered. "Jesus Christ, Red, they're going to triangulate our position," Carson yelled from below. "Then keep her low," McAllister snapped. "We've got their range." The third shot came seconds later, another clean hit. This time the target was a half-track, its passengers leaping out as flames devoured it. The entire road erupted into madness. German gunners opened fire into the trees, spraying blindly, hitting nothing but bark and snow. Tracer rounds tore through the forest, slicing streaks of orange through the white fog. Inside the Wolverine, the crew worked like a machine. McAllister aimed, Whitaker loaded, Carson maneuvered. Each man operating on pure instinct, the rhythm of survival. Brogan could barely hear himself over the cannon's concussive roar. He wanted to call it in to explain this insanity to HQ, but the radio was still dead, crackling with static. Outside, the battlefield was turning into a storm of smoke and sound. 3 vehicles already burned. The fourth was reversing into another, the 2 becoming tangled wrecks in the narrow road. McAllister didn't stop. His pulse steadied, his breathing even. He adjusted his aim slightly left, one more tank in his sights. Firing. Another shot. Another explosion. The sound rolled through the forest like a thunderclap against the hills. Inside, the crew exchanged no words. They didn't need to, because for better or worse, they were now at war entirely on their own terms. The illusion of control vanished the moment the Germans recovered from their shock. A flare shot skyward, a bright green streak cutting through the overcast gloom. Within seconds, the forest came alive, with sound-heavy machine guns opening up, 20mm autocannons chattering, and tank turrets turning with mechanical precision. "Here it comes!" Carson shouted from below, his hands gripping the controls so tightly his knuckles turned white. The Wolverine shuddered as the first incoming shell slammed into a tree just meters away. The explosion showered them with wood splinters and ice. "Armor-piercing left flank!" Brogan barked. But McAllister was already traversing the turret. Another shot screamed past this one so close it left a ringing in their ears. The fog, once their cover, had turned against them every past. Muzzle flash lit their position like a beacon. "Back us up, Carson. 10 yards, Brogan ordered. "Can't. Snow's too deep. We're bogged." McAllister's jaw tightened. "Then we hold." Through the scope, he saw the next Panther edging forward, cautious now, angling its thickest armor toward them. The driver crept behind the burning wrecks for cover, using the road's curvature to mask his approach. Smart. Too smart. McAllister exhaled slowly, adjusting his elevation. He knew he couldn't penetrate the Panther's frontal plate head-on, not with their 3-inch gun at this range, so he waited. The seconds dragged. His sight picture swayed with every heartbeat. Then, the German commander made the same mistake his predecessor had he exposed his flank for just an instant to clear debris. McAllister took the shot. The Wolverine kicked backward, snow spraying from its treads. A heartbeat later, the round slammed into the Panther's side sparks, then fire, then a violent bloom of black smoke. "Hit confirmed," Whitaker shouted. But before they could celebrate, a return shell struck just short of their position. The explosion rattled their bones, the blast wave thudding through their chests. "Close!" Carson yelled, ducking as dirt rained through the open hatch. Brogan's voice came harsh over the noise. "They've bracketed us. They're adjusting range." McAllister didn't answer. He was already sighting again, but this time the reticle trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the concussion pounding through the steel hull. Another shell landed, this one closer. The Wolverine lurched, the impact throwing Whitaker off balance. "Load her down," Carson shouted. "I'm good," Whitaker coughed, clutching his ribs. "Just ring in my bell." Brogan slammed the intercom. "We can't take another direct hit, we'll fold like a tin can." McAllister's eyes flicked between the burning wrecks and the next target creeping forward through the smoke. He spoke in a low, steady voice. "Not if we move first." He gestured toward a narrow drainage ditch off the right side of the road, barely visible beneath the snow. "Carson, pivot right, 30 degrees. Use that gully for defilade. We'll fire, then disappear." "You're insane," Brogan muttered. McAllister just grinned grimly. "Worked so far." The Wolverine jerked as Carson gunned the engine, treads clawing through the frozen ground. They slid sideways, snow cascading off the hull. The next German round screamed past where they'd been seconds earlier, a near-perfect shot that would have torn straight through them. Inside, the crew exchanged a single look, part disbelief, part adrenaline-fueled exhilaration. They were still alive. McAllister re-aimed from the ditch, smoke and frost clouding his sight. The Panther's silhouette loomed, now fully exposed. He fired. A direct hit. The German tank's ammunition cooked off in a thunderous chain of explosions that echoed for miles through the Ardennes hills. As the fireball faded, Brogan finally spoke, his voice quiet now. "You just broke every order in the book, Red." McAllister didn't look away from the scope. "Yeah," he said. "But we're still here to read it." For a few fleeting seconds, silence returned to the forest. Only the crackle of burning armor and the hiss of melting snow filled the air. The Panzer column, once a disciplined spearhead of steel, was now in chaos. Half the German formation was stuck behind smoking wrecks. The narrow Ardennes road, meant for a swift advance, had become a trap, a frozen bottleneck littered with fire and debris. Through the smoke, McAllister could see crewmen bailing out of their vehicles, silhouettes against the flames. Some tried to run for cover. Others simply froze, stunned by the sudden reversal. Brogan peered through his periscope. "They're trying to flank left, see it?" "Yeah," McAllister said, his tone flat, all instinct now. "But that snow's deeper than it looks. They'll bog down before they get line of sight." Whitaker, still catching his breath, slammed another round into the breach. Armor-piercing, loaded. McAllister exhaled. "Send it." The gun thundered again. Another hit, this one on a half-track trying to escape up the embankment. It erupted in an orange bloom, fragments showering across the road. For the first time, the German radio net lit up with frantic transmissions, half-shouted, overlapping. McAllister didn't understand the words, but the panic in their tone said enough. The crew was exhausted, deafened, and half-blind, but the rhythm had set in load, aim, fire, adjust. Over and over. "Target, Stug 10 o'clock behind the ridge," Brogan shouted. McAllister shifted his scope, spotting the low silhouette of an assault gun trying to pivot for a shot. He fired before it could. The round punched through the side armor, sparks flaring as the Stug. Gun fell limp. The vehicle rolled backward, then stopped, smoke rising from its vents. Whitaker whooped, voice hoarse. "That's 5, confirmed." McAllister didn't reply. He was watching the rest of the convoy, the remaining panzers, hesitating, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Then one of them tried to push through the wreckage, the lead vehicle grinding forward, pushing a burning hull aside with its tracks. Its commander, desperate, aimed directly at the Wolverine's last known position. "Back! Back!" Brogan yelled. Carson threw the Wolverine into reverse, treads whining in protest. But before the German could fire, McAllister caught sight of a weak spot, a tiny gap in the side skirt armor. He didn't think. He just fired. The shell slammed home. The Panther lurched, turret twisting violently before a plume of flame burst from its hatches. The rest of the column broke. One after another, German vehicles began reversing, some ramming into each other, others sliding off. The icy road. A few turned their turrets toward the tree line, firing wildly into the fog where they thought the enemy might be. But McAllister and his crew had already shifted again, moving along the ditch, firing from new angles, never staying still long enough to draw accurate fire. It was chaos, smoke, snow, and thunder. Yet in that chaos, something remarkable happened. An entire armoured formation began to collapse under the assault of a single rogue tank destroyer. Brogan could hardly believe it. He'd fought through North Africa, Sicily, and Normandy, but he'd never seen a German column lose its nerve this fast. He looked over at McAllister, who was already loading another shell. "Red," he said quietly. "They're falling apart." McAllister nodded. "Then we don't stop now." For the next 20 minutes, the Wolverine prowled the edge of the forest like a hunter in the mist. Each shot was deliberate, calculated firing only when certain. By the time the last shell casing clattered to the floor, the road was a graveyard of steel, 12 armoured vehicles burned in various states of ruin. The column that had once threatened to cut off an entire U.S. infantry division was gone. Inside the Wolverine, silence returned, but it was a different kind now. Not the tense stillness before battle, but the hollow quiet after victory. Whitaker slumped against the hull, breathing heavily. We just did that," he murmured. Brogan didn't speak. He just stared through the periscope, as if trying to convince himself it was real. Finally, McAllister lowered his scope, his voice calm and tired. "Guess the unauthorized shot paid off." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, silent, covering the burning wrecks in a thin white blanket. By dawn, the battlefield was silent again except for the faint hiss of cooling metal. Smoke drifted lazily through the trees, and the smell of burned oil hung in the air like fog. The Wolverine sat motionless in its ditch, its once olive paint now streaked black with soot. Inside, the crew was running on fumes. Their ears rang. Their throats were raw from shouting over the roar of the gun. They had survived one of the most lopsided armoured engagements of the Ardennes, but survival wasn't victory yet. "Radio check," Brogan muttered, fumbling with the handset. "HQ, this is Wolverine 2-6. Reporting contact. Heavy armour neutralised. Request position of friendly lines. Over. Static." Then, finally, a faint reply. 2-6, confirm, did you say armour neutralised? Repeat, armour neutralised. Brogan exhaled, half laughing in disbelief. "Confirmed. Whole column. You'll see the smoke." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, "Hold position. Command sending recon. Do not advance." McAllister exchanged a glance with Carson. "Translation," he muttered. "We're about to get our asses chewed." 2 hours later, as the morning sun fought through the overcast sky, a jeep bounced down the snow-covered road toward them. Inside sat 2 officers from Battalion HQ, 1 major, 1 captain. Both wore expressions that said they weren't sure whether to shake hands or start writing court-martials. The major climbed out first, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. He stared at the row of burning panzers, 12 in total, then at the single M10 sitting half buried in snow. "This all you?" he asked quietly. Brogan saluted. Yes, sir. The Major walked closer to the nearest wreck, peering inside through a scorched hatch. Panthers, he muttered. And a Stug. Jesus. He turned back toward the Wolverine. I don't even want to ask how. Before Brogan could speak, McAllister stepped forward, still streaked with grime and powder. Sir, I fired first without authorization. The Major blinked. You what? Didn't have a confirmed order, McAllister said simply. But the lead tank was about to roll right past us. I made the call. The captain beside him scribbled notes on a pad, eyebrows furrowed. You do realize that's a direct violation of standing engagement protocols, Private? McAllister met his gaze without flinching. Yes, sir. I also realize we'd all be dead if I hadn't. The Major looked between them, then at the smouldering wrecks behind him. He sighed, running a gloved hand across his face. Hell, son, you might have just stopped a regiment's advance. Brogan spoke up, voice quiet but firm. Sir, with respect, Private McAllister's judgment saved the crossroads. We didn't have radio contact. He took initiative. The Major studied Brogan for a moment, then nodded slowly. Noted. He turned to his captain. Mark it, in the report engagement initiated by gunner discretion. Results, decisive. The captain hesitated. You're not going to charge him, sir? Charge him? The Major glanced around at the burned-out battlefield. I'd have to be out of my DMN mind. He walked up to McAllister, lowering his voice. You didn't follow the book, son. But some days, the book doesn't fit the fight. Get your crew cleaned up. You'll be debriefed by Corps Intelligence tomorrow. As the jeep rolled away, Brogan turned to his men. Well, he said, cracking the faintest grin, that went better than I expected. Whitaker laughed, still leaning against the hull. Guess we're not court-martialed after all, Carson added. Maybe they'll even let us name the ditch after him. Brogan shook his head. Don't get cocky, Red. McAllister just smiled faintly, looking out at the wreckage disappearing beneath fresh snow. Too late. But even as he smiled, he knew their unauthorized stand wouldn't stay a secret. Not in this war. By the following morning, word of the Wolverine's stand had spread far beyond the tree line. Field reports, garbled and incredulous, began making their way up the chain of command, from battalion to regiment, from regiment to division headquarters. Each version grew stranger in the retelling. Single M10 halts entire panzer column. 4-man crew destroys 12 enemy vehicles. Unauthorized engagement turns German advance into rout. At first, nobody believed it. The intelligence staff at 1st Army headquarters in Spa, Belgium, flagged the report as potential exaggeration pending verification. After all, in the Ardennes that week, rumours were everywhere, some true, most not. But then, aerial reconnaissance confirmed it. Photographs taken at first light showed a line of destroyed German armour scattered along a narrow snow-covered road, burned Panthers, a wrecked Stug, cratered half-tracks, and in the midst of it all, clear track marks leading in and out from a single position an American tank destroyer dug into a ditch. The evidence was undeniable. The report was reclassified as confirmed. Within 24 hours, it landed on the desk of General Omar Bradley's operations officer. Bradley's staff reviewed it in silence. One colonel finally looked up from the paper. So, a private took the initiative, broke contact protocol, and stopped an entire armoured column. Correct, sir. The colonel set the file down. And what happened to him? Awaiting review by battalion command, came the reply. The colonel leaned back, exhaling a quiet laugh. Well, if half this story's true, give that kid a medal. Back at the front, McAllister's crew had been pulled off the line. Their Wolverine sat under maintenance, its barrel scorched and breech worn from the pounding it had endured. The men were given bunks in a drafty barn being used as a temporary command post. When the officer from division headquarters finally arrived to interview them, he didn't look like the kind who enjoyed paperwork. He was middle-aged, with a gravelly voice and the calm manner of a man who'd seen too many battles to be impressed easily. "All right, boys," he said, flipping open a small notebook. "Walk me through what happened, start to finish." For 2 hours the crew recounted every detail: the fog, the column, the waiting. The moment McAllister pulled the trigger without orders. The officer listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes. When they finished, he closed the notebook slowly. "You know," he said, looking at McAllister, "normally I'd be writing you up for insubordination." "Yes, sir," McAllister replied quietly. The officer smiled faintly. "But under the circumstances," he tapped his pen against the notebook, "I think we'll call it initiative under combat conditions." Whitaker smirked. "That what they're calling it now?" The officer stood, sliding the notebook into his coat. "You boys bought us 48 hours. Enough time to pull 2 battalions out before they were encircled. Command's taking notice." He paused, at the door, glancing back. "Private McAllister, there's talk of a commendation, maybe even a Bronze Star, but that'll depend on what the brass decide." McAllister didn't answer right away. He just looked down at his hands, calloused, stained with powder. "I didn't do it for a medal, sir." "I know," the officer said quietly. "That's why you might actually deserve one." By the end of the week, McAllister's after-action report was officially entered into divisional records. The entry read simply, "M10 Wolverine crew under Lutain. Brogan engaged superior German armour near Trois Ponts. Engagement initiated by gunner without direct order. Enemy losses: 12 armoured vehicles. Friendly losses: none. No fanfare. No embellishment. Just a small paragraph buried in the avalanche of wartime reports. But among the men of the 7th Armoured Division, the story became legend. They called it the unauthorized stand. And for once, a rule broken had saved far more lives than it risked. When the Battle of the Bulge finally drew to a close in late January of 1945, the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes were filled with wrecks, silent testaments to both courage and chaos. The M10 Wolverine of Lieutenant Brogan's crew was still there, its hull patched, its paint scorched, but its reputation untarnished. The war moved on. The front shifted eastward, toward the Rhine. But in the mess tents and bivouacs of the 7th Armoured Division, the men still talked about the day one gunner ignored the book and stopped a panzer column dead in its tracks. McAllister himself never cared for the attention. When an officer from Corps headquarters brought the paperwork for his Bronze Star, he accepted it quietly, thanked him, and went back to cleaning his gun breech. Reporters tried to track him down after the war. They never got much. He'd say the same thing every time. "I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to keep my crew alive." Brogan stayed in the army after the war, eventually teaching tactics at Fort Knox. He used McAllister's story in his lectures not as a tale of defiance, but of judgment. He'd tell his cadets, "Sometimes the right call won't come over the radio. That's when leadership means knowing what has to be done and living with it." In the years that followed, historians would study that brief skirmish as a small but remarkable example of initiative under pressure. One historian at the U.S. Army Armor School called it the most efficient tank destroyer engagement of the Ardennes. 12 kills, 4 men. One gunner who broke protocol and in doing so altered the course of a German push that could have severed the American front. But the official citation never captured the real story, the fear, the uncertainty, the moment before the trigger was pulled. That lived only in the memories of those who were there. After the war, McAllister returned to Ohio. He worked in a steel mill for 30 years, raised a family, and never spoke much about the Ardennes. When neighbors asked, he'd shrug and say, "I did my part, like everyone else." It wasn't until decades later, when his grandson found the old Bronze Star tucked inside a cigar box, that the story came out again, told around a kitchen table, with a faded photograph of the Wolverine crew propped up beside it. In that photo, taken sometime in early 1945, 4 men stand in front of their scarred M10, grinning at the camera despite the cold. Behind them, the forest is still dusted with snow. And though the war would go on for months more, that single frozen moment captured everything they had fought for: courage, defiance, and the quiet conviction that sometimes the greatest victories begin with one man deciding not to wait. Because in a war defined by orders and obedience, one unauthorized shot reminded everyone that survival and victory sometimes came down to instinct, not command. And somewhere deep in the Ardennes, under layers of moss and snow, the rusted hulls of those German tanks still rest silent witnesses to the day one gunner's defiance turned into legend.